Welcome, everyone. I'm Gloria Simmons, Director of the Thacher Gallery, the University of San Francisco. Thank you for joining us tonight and celebrating the opening of All That You Touch, Art and Ecology. We're excited to be here with you virtually tonight and hope to see you in person in the gallery through November 7th. This is the first of 3 exhibitions this year focusing on ecology and environmental justice. While the exhibition is in person, our public artist programs will be virtual. We have 4 exciting conversations coming up, including 3 conversations with smaller groupings of the artists, each moderated by a different faculty member from October 5th through the 7th. Subjects include climate transformation, the commons, and ecology and culture. And then on October 13th, we're co-presenting Indigenous Foodways, a conversation and cooking demonstration with Vincent Medina, Luis Trevino of Makamhan, Contemporary Ohlone Cuisine. This event is co-sponsored by the Jesuit Foundation's 6+U initiative, along with Environmental Studies and the Cultural Anthropology program. There's many more programs going on at USF, also linked with this exhibition, so please visit our events page regularly. We'd like to begin tonight's celebration with a land acknowledgement. The Thacher Gallery at the University of San Francisco sits on the unceded land of the Ramaytush speaking people of the Yelamu tribe, one of approximately 50 independent nations now referred to as Ohlone. The Ohlone people are still here, working for their right to remain and evolve in this space we consider San Francisco. In recognition that we all benefit from this place, we encourage everyone to learn about the Indigenous communities in the spaces you occupy. Acknowledge the difficult truths of our shared histories and the ways in which these continue to shape our lives. Inform yourself about current land issues and become a steward of these cultures and ecologies, and center and amplify Indigenous voices in these spaces. We recognize the rich cultural heritage that has survived colonization and genocide, and honor Ohlone artists, past, present, and future. As we consider our shared ecologies, the land and earth and the water and the plants and all of the other life forms that we are part of, we encourage everyone here to take time to learn more about Indigenous approaches to caring for the environment. We've also shared a resource for you in the chat. In All That You Touch, Art and Ecology, we're presenting artists whose creative practices are informed by their personal encounters with the natural world. Working across the disciplines, these artists ask, what can nature teach us about adaptation, regeneration, and healing? What can nature teach us about ourselves? This exhibition includes collage, digital photography, basketry, painting, installation, video and dance, and a sketch for music. We hope that the exhibition reminds us, as the artist Katie Dorame states, nature is not a separate entity from anything or anyone. I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the exhibition now, and just let you take a look. And for some of the artists, this will be the first time they're seeing their work in the gallery. This exhibition and the programs were shaped by many people at USF and beyond. Thank you to all of these collaborators and the hardworking crew at the Thacher Gallery who were making all of this happen even now as we're speaking. I also want to just kind of give a shout out to Nell Herbert, who brought forward a number of these artists, as well as her passion for the subject for this exhibition. Most of all, I want to thank the artists. During this celebration tonight, you'll get to meet each of them, or most of them, as well as leaders from the Black, Indigenous, people of color, students from the environment group at USF, one of our main collaborators. Jacob Lindy will tell us more about the group, and Mateo Gonzalez will moderate the Q&A. Please drop your questions in the Q&A. This is a celebration, so we hope you'll send greetings to the artists in the chat. Please don't use the chat for Q&A because we don't want to miss the questions. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. I'm excited to finally introduce you to the artists. I will give a very abbreviated bio here so we can get right to them. There will be longer bios in the chat while they're each presenting, and we'll also be including resources recommended by the artists. Byron Young is a USF professor in performing arts and social justice and a composer who creates participatory events. Nicole Dixon is an Oakland native. Her mixed media pieces center and pay homage to Black experiences and identity. Katie Dorame is a Tongva visual artist born in Los Angeles and currently creating in Oakland. Her work has recently been exhibited throughout the Bay Area and beyond. We had the pleasure of showing her work about 6 years ago. Alicia Escott is an interdisciplinary artist who has exhibited at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, among many others. She is a founding member of 100 Days Action and the Bureau of Linguistical Reality, which we will be working with in the spring. Originally from Seattle, Felicitas Fischer is classically trained ballet and modern dancer. She is the founder of Artists for Justice, an artistic collective dedicated to diverse emerging artists and local social justice initiatives. Barnali Ghosh is a designer and storyteller and a public transit walking and biking advocate who co-founded the Berkeley South Asian Radical History Walking Tour. Much of her work explores the connections between home and homeland. Connie McKenzie has trained in a variety of dance styles. Her dance film work has been featured in festivals all over the country and several places around the globe. Jaime Serra dos Santos works in the multidisciplinary realms of sound and music. His artist persona is Saint Hills. Felicitas, Connie, and Jaime collaborated on a dance film in the exhibition, so they will be speaking together. And I'm also happy to announce that they are USF alums, so thank you and welcome back. Linda Yamane is an Ohlone artist and tribal scholar who lives in the Monterey area, the homeland of her Rumsen Ohlone ancestors. She is most known for bringing back the lost art of Ohlone, basket making, and her artworks can be seen at numerous Bay Area interpretive exhibits, including the Oakland Museum of California. Minoosh Zomorodinia is an Iranian-born interdisciplinary artist whose artwork is inspired by her environment. She has exhibited locally and internationally. Now we will turn this over to Byron to begin. Artists, please remember to turn on your video and speaker when your slide comes up and to turn both off when you're done.
Hello, I'm Byron Young, and I am a composer, and part of my practice involves participatory music. And a few years ago, my practice as a composer is writing notation on paper. But I've started to fold paper and partially prompted by, actually my father just passed away. So one of our family customs is to fold paper for 100 days and then have a prayer ceremony where we burn objects that we folded as a to send to my father. But in this case, I'm not I'm not going to burn these, but rather that is part of my family, and also folding paper is I've been thinking about reuse, and in composing this requiem, how trees can be reused and brought back into this project. And so these happen to be objects, all objects that my father has touched. I've been back home since June 5th, helping to care for him. So for example, there's a church pamphlet, and then he has these magazines from 2011 that I found. And so those were folded as well, and they look like seed cones or pine cones. So I really want to thank Thacher Gallery, Gloria Nell, and everyone for your continued support and openness. These are sketches, and so it's thrilling to have these included as part of the exhibition. Very much in process work. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here tonight. I think this exhibition is very dynamic. My name is Nicole Dixon. And I think the best way for me to describe my work is to really describe the piece that you see on the screen here, which is called The Axe Forgets, but the Tree Remembers. Most of the work I've been making for the past maybe 10 years or so has been mixed media. And that's because it feels like each medium, each material has a different kind of resonance and vibration. And when you can layer and mix them together, it can really help me to express the concepts in a more dynamic way. All of my figures, and my work is figurative, and all of them so far have really been in charcoal, which is really just burnt wood. So it's using this natural element and using my fingers to render these figures. And I'm centering Blackness, Black people, and Black experience in a very, very Black medium. Literally a very Black medium for a strategic purpose. And that purpose really is to help to transform the way that people view Blackness, because you know, it's been highlighted recently that the stories people tell and inscribe on these can literally be life or death, you know. And so my ultimate goal is to really both render Black figures and Black people and Black images as I see them, which is as they naturally are, not as society, you know, dictates, but as whole, as complex, as beautiful, as spiritual, etc. And this image here is really about grief. And it's about the way that collectively and personally, none of us get through this life without trying to figure out how to manage grief. And this piece really was inspired by the piece of redwood that you see there at the bottom, which was a salvaged piece of redwood from that's local from Oakland. And I started to read a little bit about how redwood trees heal, which is not in the same way that I was thinking that I should be healing. So, you know, redwood trees are some of the oldest living beings on earth, and they can survive so much, right? They survive fire, they survive all kinds of pests and pestilence and damage. And they do that by essentially kind of walling off the site of the injury to prevent further contamination and to prevent the spread of disease. And also they just literally continue to rebuild new cells and regrow cells around their wounds. And they just move on, which is very interesting and seems a little bit like it could be a personal goal for me, at least in this stage of all the various and sundry things that I am in the process of grieving. And this is also like a touchstone for me culturally too, because my community has a lot of compounded grief that we have to figure out how to, we have to figure out how to live and how to move on and how to have joy and new beginnings. And in this piece in particular, the figure that has the colored anointed hands is really representing the ancestors. Whether they're martyred or not, they're still very present with me and for my community. And in my work, you'll also see a lot of symbols, cultural symbols, and also metaphysical symbols, personal symbols. And so the symbol at the top, the gilded image there is a metaphysical symbol for the flower of life, which really represents like a blueprint of life and an archive of knowledge that's accessible even in our toughest moments. And so all of the work that is in this show incorporates symbols that are personal and cultural, and also incorporates natural elements, either in the materials or in the imagery. And all of the elements together really serve as totems or emblems or anointings for the figures that are really centering the Black experience. And in general, my work kind of serves as a touchstone for me for how to stay centered and grounded and whole and healthy on this path in this particular skin. Thank you.
All right, so I don't know if you can see me, you probably can. I just can't see myself. My name's Katie Dorame, and I wanna thank everyone for coming to this talk, and for all the other artists. To be in a show with you guys is really cool. It looks really good. I haven't seen it in person yet, but I'm looking forward to it. My work has this underlying current through all of it. And when I started making these collages at first, like the piece that's up that you guys can see, when I started making these collages, this was for SF MoMA's open space blog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It's a really great resource, even though SF MoMA decided to end that program. There's an uproar. I think they're in their final stages, but there's an archive, you can look it up. And the article that I did this work for was about Alcatraz and the Native American occupation of Alcatraz that occurred. And they asked me to make some work, and what centers all of my work is this idea that Indigenous contribution and our existence and continued survival is present everywhere. And it is obviously visible to us in our communities, but my work attempts to kind of bring the visibility out more into the world, and the Indigenous contributions to the land and to just what we see around us every day is much bigger than has been depicted in history books and movies and everything. So this piece has someone grinding acorns over the actual building of Alcatraz. If only we could just grind things that have been built up as incarcerations to people and leave our imprint on it or bring it back So I'm really excited that there's a lot more conversations about ecology and nature occurring, and they're being much more intersectional now, which is exciting. And things, things we've been going through in the past couple of years have been bringing those conversations up to the surface. So when I started making most of the work that's in the show, it was a couple months into the pandemic, and I had a 4-month-old, and I just the work kind of flew out of me like crazy, and I started making these collages, and it was tied to the land, but like I said, or like I was quoted as earlier saying, nature isn't something that's outside of us. We're connected to everything. And so when I was making these collages, I wasn't thinking, oh, these are about nature, but they are about my connection to the land and my connection to growing up in Los Angeles, being Tongva on my dad's side and having these moments of seeing, seeing through my eyes and my lens of what is possible in an optimistic way. Like if we could just as a society acknowledge what those contributions are and learn from them. And they were fun to make, and I'm really excited to be showing them. And if you have any more questions, just Q&A me. Thanks.
Hi there. I think you guys can see me. This is anyhow, that was so beautiful. I feel really honored to be showing with all of you. My name is Alicia Escott. I'm an interdisciplinary artist working across mediums, and I've been addressing environmental and social justice issues in my work for, over 15 years. I think Glory mentioned this, but I have both a rigorous studio practice, which is the work in the show is there, as well as a social practice where I bring people together in dialogue. I presented work here at USF with both my political collective, 100 Days Action, some of you may remember, and in my collaborative project, the Bureau of Linguistical Reality, where we work with the public to identify the feelings and experiences that we're all having as the climate's changing that we don't yet have the words to describe. And then we work with the public to name those, to create new words that codify those experiences. At large in my practice, I'm sort of forever interested in what it is to be an aware human in this moment with day-to-day responsibilities and deadlines, and how we navigate between those and the course of the mass extinction event that our own lives correspond with, and the overarching specter of the climate crisis. I'm particularly interested in creating spaces to sit with the grief of living with this moment and the ways we collectively avoid this grief and how that manifests collectively. I have a longstanding practice of writing love letters to extinct species, wherein I tell them everything that's happened since they left me, like rock and roll, or the stock market, or the internet, where I can find them still. And this practice is actually a radical retelling of human history and puts a mirror up to the insanities of our time. And one of the pieces in the show, sort of to the corner there, the video piece is a work that's sort of an offshoot of that project, wherein I'm addressing both COVID-19 as well as the local wildflowers that I collaborated with from Save Seeds over the course of the pandemic. And this work on a larger scale was really interesting as a way of making an artwork that because it couldn't be shown in the galleries that it was originally intended to, it stayed outside, and it became a work for native bees and butterflies and other pollinators. And I was really interested in showing work for a non-human audience in that way. But of course, I sort of recodified it into this video that you can experience in the gallery. And the other work I have in the show that you can see on the screen, kind of tangled, is a piece wherein I drew during much of the pandemic an acorn a day, thinking about the inherent possibilities within seeds and likening those to the movements and uprisings that flourished in the soil of the pandemic. And these drawings are made on pieces of plastic construction material that's used to cover buildings that they actually shrink wrap with heat. And so I melted them and rejoined them together. And in this work, I'm exploring the tensions of California ecologies that evolved with fire, that were co-evolved with Native people living here in fire, and the regenerative potential of fire. And that's sort of abutted and entangled with also looking at the destruction that fire has on the built environment that we've created. And underlying this work, similar to Katie, is an ongoing investigation of what is nature and an undoing of the construct of nature as separated from ourselves and our world, while not ignoring the very clear ways that our manipulation of materials on a global and geologic scales impacts the systems and the relationships that we've hereto termed nature. I could talk more, but I think I'll pass it along. So.
Hello, I'm Felicitas Fischer. I'm the choreographer of Lungs of the Earth.
Hello, I'm Connie McKenzie. I was the filmmaker and editor for Lungs of the Earth.
Hello, I'm Jaime Serra dos Santos, and I was the sound designer for this project.
Yeah, so Lungs of the Earth is a dance film that was co-created by the three of us, and we were trying to explore a very specific environmental crisis happening in the Amazon region of Brazil. And it takes on a political and historical lens because there's a lot that goes into how Brazil's relationship to its nature, specifically this, very special and rare region of the Amazon that doesn't exist in any other place in the world. So it was really exploring how their relationship to that specific area has changed over time, and especially with their president, Jair Bolsonaro. And the dancers throughout the film take on these different kinds of personas, trying to personify the trees around them and the environment around them. So as if to say, if they had a way to express perhaps what the nature is feeling in response to the environmental crisis, movement that would perhaps represent that. And then there's another section where they do take on the persona of Bolsonaro himself and the kind of political power that he holds that is responsible also for certain progressions in the degradation of the Amazon rainforest. And then we also finally include and highlight the voice of the Kayapo tribe leader, who speaks to the world, really trying to encourage people to take, even if it's a crisis happening in another country, in another land, that this is all our land and we're responsible for taking care of it and protecting it. So that is the general scope of it. And I think the process in general was very collaborative. We started off with brainstorming ideas of how we could actually create sound first that would tell this story, that incorporates all these different voices and narratives into one, and then creating movement that would then be in harmony with that sound. And then we had film happen, and that was quite a interesting experience because we had one day to really put it all together, or at least rehearse together.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start from towards the end, which is, the project itself was, even though it was filmed live, was really created remotely in a lot of ways. We actually only had 2 days together. One day that we had a dress rehearsal, which was an hour, and then the film day itself, which was 4 hours. And that was to get everything from start to finish that you see in the film. And then kind of very shortly after that was a pretty quick, I think 3-week turnaround before it aired for Pache's 20th anniversary. And so, you know, in a lot of ways, as Felicitas said, this was a huge team effort because so much planning went into the forefront of this project, which is why, you know, that push at the end actually happened. And, you know, I think in a lot of ways, the three of us worked really well together with piecing the things together as we could as we went along. So, you know, once it was time to really make the thing, so much of it was laid out that it just fell together very naturally.
Yeah, and I think one of the coolest things about the process of this piece is that it was all done remotely. We really started working on this earlier in 2021 when everything was still closed. Vaccines weren't really rolling out yet. And so Felicitas and I communicated a lot on the sound design before the choreography and rehearsal process started with the dancers, and that was all via phone and via Zoom. And then when rehearsals and choreography started, that was all via Zoom. And so when you watch the film, because it is you know, an ensemble of dancers, you would think that this all took space physically and that we were all in the room present, but it was literally all virtually. Like as Connie said, it was those 4 hours of film time, and the 1 hour, those 5 hours really were the majority of people involved were together. I wasn't even there for those 5 hours, but it really shows that you can make art in this new world that is very meaningful and that is like going to make an impact and in environmental justice, even if we're not together physically.
Yeah, and I think the three of us are really proud of this work. You know, all three of us are Pache 2019 alums, so not even that long ago. And, you know, here we are, like actually using the degree that we came to USF for. And it was just nice. It was great to have this piece together to make something that, you know, directly was about social and environmental justice and had that message that was clear that audiences should take action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I would just finally add that what I really enjoyed about this piece and creating it was that we each had very different connections to the topic itself. And I think that helped give it a broader perspective so that we were telling the narrative from a lot of different angles. And Connie really did a wonderful job capturing this on camera as well. And I think in the sound too, it takes you on this journey that is so jarring sometimes. It can really transition from, you know, the soft sound of the trees moving, and then all of a sudden you have really strong rhythmic and percussion, and I think that it just highlights how different our artistic practices are, but how they come together in harmony and they can create something like this. So yeah.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can see me, but okay. So I'm Bernali, and thank you everybody for being here. This is my first time showing my visual work in this curated format, and I'm really honored to be in the same group as these amazing artists that you're hearing from today. And I want to thank Nell and Glory for including me in this exhibit and for all your support. And thank you, Nell, especially for finding me on Instagram. So I'm a designer, storyteller, and a public transit walking bike advocate. I'm based in Berkeley, Ohlone territory. I'm also a co-founder of the Berkeley South Asian Radical History Walking Tour. And for the last 9 years, my partner and I have been using storytelling and theater to share narratives of local South Asian American resistance movements, from immigrant freedom fighters in the 1910s to queer and feminist organizing a century later. So much of my work and life today is about finding belonging here, while also making connections between my home and my homeland. Like many immigrants, this process is also an effort to find healing and joy. Tomorrow, need a moment. Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And every year, it's a reminder of how hard finding belonging can be. So, but for many of us, it's also a reminder of the courageous organizing that was done by South Asian, Sikh, Muslim, Arab, and other impacted communities in the face of backlash attacks, profiling, otherizing, surveillance, detentions, and war. However, my creative work is rooted in the process of turning these tears, personal and systemic trauma, into moments of joy. Whether that's in the form of street theater, celebrating South Asian American resistance movements, or documenting through photos the beauty of plants at night after the loss of a parent, or taking photos of myself embodying flowers in the middle of a pandemic. Now, others started baking sourdough, but I'm not a baker. So this is what I started doing. So I practiced as a landscape architect for a decade, designing public parks, schools, streets. And during that time, flowers and plants were often reduced to Latin names that I had to memorize. And it was only when I stopped practicing, which was a decade ago now, was when I took to walking in my neighborhood, taking photos of trees and flowers, reveling in their colors and forms, and not having to worry about what they were called. These floral embodiment self-portraits that are in this exhibit are rooted in those walks. During the pandemic, my daily walks took on even more meaning, and I became even more familiar with spring flowers. And I began to connect them with the colors that were trapped in my saris, in the suitcases from home, that I kept mostly closed for decades. So I started using these saris and using poses inspired by Odissi dance to mimic and try to express the spirit of the flowers. And I also made up sometimes funny stories about the flowers and my connection to them. Through this project, I found that my growing familiarity with native flowers of my adopted home helped ground me in place. Today, when I see these flowers, I know that I'm home. So the picture you're looking at is of the Douglas iris, which is a native California wildflower. It was challenging, but also fun to mix and match patterns and to find a Odissi dance pose that would reflect the flower. The sari is made of cotton, it's from South India, and the black and white patterned fabric is a raw silk scarf from Bengal. I've now created 16 pieces in this series. The first flower I embodied was a California poppy, and it's featured in the exhibit, along with interpretations of a bleeding heart, a rare orchid, a California native peony, and other common and rare native flowers. These final pieces are meant to delight, but just below the surface are layers that I hope will provoke conversations about how British colonialism and colonialism generally has disrupted Indigenous landscapes. It has disrupted Odissi dance and handloom weaving. And I hope, and this process of recovering them is filled with pain and pleasure. I hope these images will provoke curiosity about California's indigenous plants and the role of humans in nature. I also hope that this project can offer those of us who are immigrants pathways to unlocking materials and memories that many of us keep locked up, and instead use them to find our place in this country. So finally, I want to thank a few folks. It won't be everybody that who has been involved in this coming to life, but I want to thank the folks at the California Native Plant Society Facebook group. The knowledge that I gained there and the support for these images helped sustain this work. My dance friends at Odissi Villas who ground me. My friends at the Alliance of South Asians Taking Action, ASATA, which is my organizing home. My partner in projects and life, Anirvan, and my mom and mom-in-law for their saris, and all the other women who've given me saris, some of whom are not around anymore. I hope you approve of how I've used them. This is an ongoing series that you can view on my Instagram, but I hope that you're able to visit the exhibit to see them in sizes that are larger than most of our screens. In these pandemic times of grief and isolation, this series has allowed me to feel joy and connection, and I hope that viewing them will do the same for you. Thank you.
Mrs. Uikan in Mrs. I, Ime Makmash. Hello and welcome everyone. Ka in Karak Linda Yamane, Rumsen Oloni Ka in Monterey Karuk. I am an Ohlone basket weaver and artist living in Monterey, and I've spent more than 35 years, half of my life so far, researching, finding, and bringing back into practice many of the arts and technologies of my Ohlone ancestors. I went from reading that all of our baskets had disappeared from the world to discovering by chance that there are still a small number of them, maybe only 20, 25 worldwide. And quite a few of these are in European museum collections, making it pretty complicated and expensive to visit them. But that's what I eventually had to do in order to photograph and study them in detail and determine the native plants that they're made from. Well, after that, I spent quite a few years looking for the plants in places I could harvest them and near home. And finally, I was able to begin the labor-intensive work of preparing those materials for weaving and then actually beginning the weaving itself. The works I've shared for this exhibit include the ceremonial basket that you see on the screen, decorated with a pattern of red feathers and more than 1,000 little sequin-like shell beads from the Olivella biplicata sea snail that I had to teach myself to make one by one. This was the first basket of its kind to be made in about 250 years, and it took me more than a year and a half to make. Also on display is a pair of very special basketry ear ornaments based upon a very small number of similar pieces that were purchased in Fremont at Mission San Jose around about 1834, 1835 or 6. It was really hard work, but great fun to bring these tupen tiprin, we call them in my Rimsin Ohlone language, basket ear ornaments, back into our community again. I also make everyday work baskets and other utilitarian things like beautiful string made from ugly looking dried up stems of stinging nettles, for example, or milkweed or dogbane hemp, all plants native to the area. The purpose, though, of my work is not to make replicas of stuff from the past, but to make them part of a living culture. I'm revitalizing these old technologies so that the practices can continue on in our communities into the future. Without the plants, there can be no baskets, no handmade string or beautiful soap root brushes. If climate change scorches California to the point where our marshes dry up even, there will be no tule reeds to make our canoe-shaped boats. Our heritage is one of living close to the earth, but the earth itself is in danger now and needs all of us more than ever to make big changes so she can be healthy again and continue to give us life. Through my work, I hope if you get a chance to visit the exhibition that you'll get some fresh insights into the first peoples of the Bay Area, and that you'll also get a sense of the complexities of their world, the complexities of their lives, that they were creative and resourceful and did more than like collect nuts and berries, like that kind of tired old stereotype, which I hope will be dispelled and make you both see and feel their humanity. Thanks. Shoo-doo-doo.
Hi, everyone. I'm the last person, but I want to say that I hope you're not tired. So much full of talent. I'm so glad to show along with all of you wonderful presentation, and thank you so much for including me in this show. So my name is Minoosh Zomorodinia. I'm originally from Iran. My work is a lot referencing natural environment, some sort of using the body in forms and different shapes and mediums while referencing the environment. So I'm interdisciplinary artist. A lot of work, my past work is just as I said, performances, videos, installations, sculptures, all different forms, but referencing nature. But specifically over from since 2016, I started a body of work, which is walking. So I use walking as a catalyst to kind of respond and reference the idea of land, the colonial land, like how the body forms, how the body shapes. So I started using, recording those walking paths and routes and make those sculptures. And my original idea was that I'm making these walking as a kind of like a performance and turning them to an objects that they're going to be valuable and they're going to be objects that can be sold. So it's a lot of referencing to the history, a lot referencing to the kind of like a notion of like objects and selling artwork like as a object. So in this body, and one of the series that I started actually was that I'm walking on a land that doesn't belong to me now. I own it and I make it mine. So it's kind of like colonial walk. And then I've been using different techniques. So I use a lot in technology, specifically for this piece that I'm referencing, how technology is changing and reforming and reshaping the archiving and the memory of the land. As you see, I'm with this specific piece, I'm referencing monumental architecture and kind of referencing how the places is looking and staying and going to be for us in the future with using of the technology, using CNC, laser cut machine, and this specific ones is print on sand. So I use sand on these cutouts that they are leftovers from the CNC machine. And the imagery that you see, all the actual imagery of the locations that I've walked on. So kind of like trying to reshape and, find this new way of talking about how the technology is changing the future, the memory of the physical space, but with the data that I'm recording through the GPS on my phone. I use gold in my work, referencing not only the wealth, not only the time that I've been spending, with this specific work is just about time and space, some sort of like recording this time and bringing in as a new object. And so I make them a valuable, precious thing. And you see that they are kind of like gold leaf on the top, in the middle sculptures. And I can talk later more. If you have any question, happy to answer. That's about it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to, before I get started, to thank all the artists. It's really cool hearing all of your stories and seeing all your amazing artwork. But I'm Jacob. I use the pronouns he, him, and I'm currently a senior at USF, and I'm the president of BIPOC, Students for the Environment. For those who don't know, BIPOC, or BIPOC, is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. As environmentalists, one of our goals is to protect, but also to connect with nature. We believe that it takes on many forms, surrounds us, and connects us to each other, to our campus, and to our environment. We value nature because it is regenerative, adaptive, and healing. To create a visual representation of these values on the USF campus, our organization created the map you see here. It was designed by one of our members, Mateo, who will be moderating the Q&A section after this. Our hope for this interactive exhibit is that people will write or draw about the connections they feel on campus, whether it's a connection to nature, to another person, or to the environment, or to anything else really, to create a web of connections. We believe that connecting to one another and to our environment is especially important in the fight against climate change. Our organization's goal is to expand the representation of BIPOC in the environmental programs at USF and to uplift those voices in the environmental movement more broadly. Our organization was started because BIPOC are often rejected from the environmental movement. We don't fit the image of what the mainstream environmental movement considers to be an environmentalist. However, BIPOC have been at the front lines of all environmental injustices, fighting for the rights and justice we deserve. Simultaneously, BIPOC are disproportionately impacted by the devastating effects of climate change. It's important that we fight for our voices to be heard. So if you're interested in joining the conversation around this or learning more about what we're fighting for, please come to one of our meetings. All of our links will be put in the chat, and we will be holding a couple of different events throughout this semester and next semester as well. But yeah, I'll hand it off to Mateo now. They're the events coordinator for our organization, and they'll be moderating the Q&A for the artists.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Mateo. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the events coordinator for BIPOC Students for the Environment. So before we get started with the Q&A section, I'd like to invite all of the artists to go ahead, turn your cameras back on, and then we will get into some questions and some conversation. Thank you all so much for contributing your work. I'm so moved by some of the pieces that were presented today. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. One of the first ideas that I wanted to explore was the idea or the concept of healing. I know Barnali Ghosh talked about drawing inspiration from Southeast Asian or Sikh, Muslim or queer resistance movements, right? Turning tears into joy. And I also know Nicole Dixon talked a little bit about centering Black people and Blackness in an anti-Black world. So I have a very open-ended question. Anyone can answer this. Do you feel that healing plays an important role in your work? And if so, how does that manifest?
I can go if I can start. So as you can see through my presentation, I was like on the brink of tears the whole time. And part of it is because, you know, being in this country as an immigrant is still a very raw experience. And with the anniversary of 9/11 coming up, it brings up a lot of emotions about all the things you've told yourself about why you came to this country. And most times immigrants aren't told that we're coming to stolen land, right? When we're in school, when we learn history, we're told that Christopher Columbus discovered America and here we are. So it takes some work and some effort, and it takes a lot of self-reflection and also landing in a place like Berkeley to make yourself aware of that fact and realize that a lot of the displacement, the emotions that you're feeling around that are because you have faced displacement from your country because of, say, British colonialism. That's somehow pushed you here, but when you land here, you're trying to negotiate a different kind of displacement because you've landed on stolen land, right? So you have to repair those relationships. Often, say for my work, both through the walking tour, and it's South Asian that I'm talking about. So it's folks from countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar. That's the part of the world that we share these histories of. We try to create a sense of belonging for our communities, that we were here 100 years ago, but not only were we here 100 years ago, we were fighting for justice and equity. And for those of us who are later immigrants, who are post-1965 immigrants, who can often be doctors, engineers, and that's the stereotype of our community, which invisibilizes undocumented folks in our community. It's telling us that, look, our ancestors fought for equity and justice right here on the streets of Berkeley. Can we also do that? In my work with the flowers, I think for me, a lot of my memories of nature are from where I grew up. Those are the flowers I remember. Those are the stories I heard. Those were the flowers and plants that showed up in rituals. And coming here, again, you feel a sense of displacement. There is this idea, I think, that a lot of immigrants go through, which is, this is just like that. We're always trying to find things here that remind us of things at home, which is why when I saw the California poppy, I was immediately reminded of, say, the marigold, which, by the way, is not native to India. It's actually native to Mexico, but has a huge presence in Indian rituals. And I think because of this project, I've connected, like I said, with native plants in a way that those smells, those colors, those forms are now what sort of bring me joy. And that's how I'm negotiating the healing of being somebody from a different place. I think there's a question in the Q&A about how South Asian communities can continue to do this. And I'm happy to answer it now or later. What do you think, Mateo?
Yeah, you can go ahead and answer it now.
Okay. So one example I want to give of how South Asians can do this. So some of the things that we've been doing in Asata and through another organization that I co-founded, Brown and Green, South Asian Americans for Climate Justice, we've been working in partnership with communities and showing up for things like the refinery walk, which was led by Indigenous communities here. Another way is through the walking tour and community organizing in Berkeley. Last year, we had a street named for an early South Asian immigrant, Kalabagai, who was turned away from a house that she and her family came to live in Berkeley by racist white neighbors. And when we embarked on that project, one of the things we did in the beginning, when it looked like it might become a reality, was reach out to Corina Gold of Saugariya Land Trust and of the chairperson of the Lejano Loni, and basically ask for their blessing. Like, it wasn't enough, I think for us who are doing this organizing, that only the Berkeley City Council approves this, but also that the original inhabitants of the land accept us here. And she wrote this amazing letter, and I'm going to read just a little bit from it, which says that when the opportunity to participate in the Shattuck Avenue name change came up, the tribe wholeheartedly supported the name change to Kalabagai Way, because we want to acknowledge that there have been and continue to be people who come to our territory who have faced and resisted oppression and whose stories should be lifted up and remembered. The history of Kalabagai might not be told or acknowledged if we didn't offer this opportunity. So I think it's about centering the experience of Indigenous communities, but also finding ourselves in relationship to those communities and acknowledging how colonialism has impacted so many of us. And the reason we're here often, even if it looks by choice, is often because of that sort of long-lasting impact of British colonialism. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
That was beautiful. Thank you. So this next question is for Felicitas, Connie, and Jaime. I know you all mentioned that you are USF alums. So I wanted to know if you feel that your creative process has changed since being a USF student, and if it has, how so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me personally, since graduating, I've actually tried to step away more from the structured practices that dance has. Usually there are classes, there are intensives, there are workshops, there are auditions. And I actually took a year to live in Argentina and just kind of step away from everything for a little bit. And while I was there, I noticed and observed a lot of art that happens spontaneously, and in public, wherever you went, whether it was in the subway. And I mean, this isn't specific to just Buenos Aires, but it's, you know, you see this in many metropolitan cities around the country and the world. But I think just being able to observe and notice how fully people show up and perform their art, even if it's just for the passing by, you know, community walking on the street, or if it's just for the one person sitting on the subway with you, that they really they take that opportunity to show their art in whatever setting that is. And it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be on a stage. It doesn't have to be in whatever conditions or structures that we have kind of imposed, or where art happens, and that art can happen really anywhere. And so for me, that meant then going into last year when the pandemic hit, it's just really using your resources. Like, as a recent graduate, and you know, you're finding your way, you're taking the time to find your next steps and find the resources you need for your own practice and what that looks like. So it's about defining that for yourself. And so for me, it was just my little studio apartment, and that little 10 by 10 foot space was my studio. And I had a weekly practice that I would just engage in improv, dance, and allow myself to express everything that I felt during that past year. And it was probably one of the most freeing and one of the most interesting, I think, phases of my practice with dance that I've ever had in my life. All the previous years of training and like really hard physical technique did not yield as much joy that this did. So that's my personal experience with it, but I'll let you guys go ahead. Want to go first?
Sure. I think that in this piece particularly, personally, I incorporated several things that I both learned as a student in USF, as well as what happened after that. I mean, the three of us graduated in the spring of 2019, which means we had one semester of normal pre-pandemic adult life. And then after that, it was just 2020. And I think particularly how that informed my art making, because I'm a music producer and sound designer. A lot of it is literally just sitting at home on your computer with some instruments and making sound that way. So for me, I'm very lucky to say the pandemic kind of created the perfect environment to practice continually. And I had the privilege to do that. And I think that was kind of perfect, because when Felicitas reached out and said, like, do you want to work on this project together? I had been making so much work just being in the pandemic isolated, that I think that was what facilitated how quick we came up with the soundscape that was the score to this short film. But so yeah, that, you know, practice, just being alone and not really being in a class, having to do a deadline or having to do a specific sort of project in a specific sort of format. Just that freedom to create in my room during the pandemic definitely informed how I'm making art now. But I do want to give a shout out to USF, because for those of you who have watched the film or will watch the film, will see that the sound is very musical, but it's not necessarily melodic in any way. And I think one of the first things I learned as a freshman at Performing Arts and Social Justice at USF was that we needed a definition for music. And my professor then defined it as music being humanly organized sound. And I think that's something that always stuck with me, you know, that as long as a human is organizing the sound, it can be music. And also I took a class with Byron, who is here, called Creating Soundscapes. And that sort of exploration of seeing music and possible sonic interpretation of everything around you is something that stuck with me, you know, throughout my journey.
All right. So I think for me, this is a two-part question, because it means, A, how has it changed while I was a student? And then how has it changed again after I was a student? Because that was kind of two very distinct phases. So coming into school, I was like, I'm an ex-dancer. I kind of had given it up. And of course, through finding Pache, rekindled my love. And I think my junior year was when I first decided, I think I want to film dance, mostly because I just wanted a more direct route to being in charge, as funny as that sounds. I think when you're a dancer or one of those like entertaining front performing artists, I felt like I would always be in the position where people would be deciding my career for me, right? And there's an element of always like, I want to decide, but I think I'm not, going through the classical route of going through company and all that stuff. So I wanted something that felt like, oh, I can actually have some agency here. And so that's when I first started calling myself a dance filmmaker. Like, what on earth is a dance filmmaker? I had to explain that to everybody. And that just expanded because as soon as I discovered, the technical side of stuff, I fell in love with that because that's its own. It's very like, it's technical, but in a way that's very soothing because you have so much liberty with what you decide to do with that information, that I started doing stuff that went from street photography to like full on like Photoshop compilations of things that I just found online, right? And so I think that's when I started using the term, okay, I guess I'm like an interdisciplinary artist, right? And that's kind of what I tell people these days. And so that's how I thought of myself kind of straight through graduation. I said I'm an interdisciplinary artist with an emphasis on dance film, right? Because that was my specialty. And so then kind of after that period, I started working as a project manager. And I think for anybody who does work in those sectors of the creative industry, you learn how much of your art, it's a couple of things. One, you learn to define art differently because you don't make art for yourself the same way as much. And I think two, what art making looks like really changes because for me, art making meant originally that I was the one doing the thing. But there's also an element of art making that happens when you're organizing the thing as well. And so kind of incorporating that into, what it means to be an artist. Like, not only am I a dance filmmaker, but I consider myself a producer. And that itself is a level of art making that I take on. On the other side, like, I think, especially since like a lot of this work I'm doing is not for myself, I've had to separate what am I doing what is my art making that is for me, and what is my art making that I'm doing for others. And they're not the same at all. And I think, Lungs of the Earth was cool because this was a piece that I was not doing for me, but it became about it for me in a lot of ways, just because of the environment that these two helped create along with USF. And I think that was a really special experience in that way. But I think one thing in general that I've taken away is like what you get from a project and whether it's for you or not. Sometimes it's up to you. Sometimes there's so many different factors that become involved. And I think as artists, so often we are asked to create things for others. And, there's always this question. I'm like, okay, is this really for me? Or am I just doing this because I need to support myself, right? Because as much as we all love creating our wonderful ideas all the time, that's not the full scope of the job. And so I think in a lot of ways, this experience too has helped me understand what my responsibility as an artist is. It's not just to make things that are beautiful. It's also to tell the stories that need to be told, to uphold culture, to, organize and make that face and all that kind of stuff. And so those are some things that I've kind of carried post-graduating USF.
One more thing I would like to add about how the process has changed, like since working in school to out of it is, well, I think Past J in general does do a really great job of helping us connect with the other departments. And so we always have had opportunities to cross collaborate with the music and also the theater majors. But I think what you really realize once you graduate is like those people that were in your class or that you cross collaborated with, like that's your network. Those are the people that you can create together with. And I think the fundamental belief, at least about this project, is that this was co-created. This wasn't just one person's idea necessarily, but it required the efforts and the ideas and the thought and the feeling and everything from all three of us in order to bring it together. And I think that just really highlights how important creating is with others, that it's not just something you do on your own, but creating is always with others, and it's always in response and has a relationship to whether it's the subject that you're painting or it's the environment that you're in, you're always in relationship with others. And so I think that's a very core belief that we kind of hold to as co-creators. And I think that this project also just really highlights that too. So yeah.
All right, thank you guys so much for that. As a student, I really appreciated hearing what y'all had to say. I was listening, I was taking notes. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. We do have quite a few questions left and like a limited amount of time. So if we do not get to your question, I apologize. But Nicole Dixon, this one is for you. It's from the audience. It says, your reference to how redwood trees survive fire by growing cells around their wounds / walling off injury and the Black experience / grief was so vivid. Would you please speak more about this? I'm curious to see how you came to this parallel.
Sure. I think like most gems that can be extracted from any concept, it's a process. So I think in general, people have personal and community trauma, right? All of us, right? Every human. And even if you're a part of a community that doesn't have a lot of trauma, you have personal trauma. That's just the way life is. And so I've definitely gone through a lot of trial and error around healing and around grieving. And, you know, in my very Virgo brain, I think about things like, you know, is this the proper way to grieve? Or is this am I really healing? And can I make a list about it and check things off the list? And how, you know, how does one actually grieve? How does one actually heal and come out whole and better on the other side? And, you know, I've experimented with all sorts of things. And, you know, I think just, you know, there are certain things that resonate with you at certain times for important reasons. And so, and when inspiration strikes, you know, you just kind of follow the muse. So for some reason on this particular day, after going through many, many processes, the redwood, you know, I had read a lot about redwoods, spent a lot of time in redwoods. And for some reason on this particular day, when I was getting ready to make this piece, that it just kind of reverberated and resonated, and I was able to draw meaning from it. So, and you know, I think part of me was really trying to kind of honor all the different ways that people can grieve, or the ones that are the ways that you're not necessarily supposed to grieve, you know, that grief is just messy and it just is what it is. And so on the one hand, the idea of moving on or of continuing to grow, you know, like if you look at the redwood, if you were to dissect a redwood, you could literally see all the injuries recorded. You could see every scar, every single thing that happened to it. It's still there and it's still present. And I think I had this idea that like I was going to be able to transform you know, the wound and alchemize it and make it into something that it's not. This piece was really a way for me to kind of sit with and be okay with sitting with and being with the grief. And it just is what it is. And I can continue to just grow and walk. So process-wise, everything is pretty organic. And you know, I think there are reasons why we make meaning and find meaning in certain things, and why we find inspiration in certain things. And we just need to take every single bit of inspiration we can from anywhere we get it, essentially.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, I really resonated with that idea that grief is messy, right? And there isn't really one way to do it. So thank you for sharing. Alicia, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, I just want to follow up with that and say I think it's so important sitting with the grief and sitting with the messiness of the grief. And I think with the topics of the show and climate chaos I think sometimes there can be an energy that we don't have time to sit with it, because the crisis that we're facing is so huge, and there's a sense to be really solution based, but we're not going to engineer our way out of it. And I think it's interesting, just even in this conversation, there's been a lot of words like fighting climate change and fighting, but actually just sitting with and healing, and really realize that what we're doing is fighting our own nature, and what the earth wants is what we want, and it's just a matter of stopping fighting ourselves. So when we can sit with that grief, I think that's when, instead of being solution focused, we can let real healing emerge, and the solutions will emerge organically.
Thank you for that. All right, so another question I have for the audience, this can be for anybody, but Byron, Katie, Minoosh, I know you all have not spoken yet. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. So what does nature teach you, and how does this manifest in your work? Again, this can be for anybody to answer.
I'll go ahead and jump in, extending what Nicole and Alicia and so many were talking about this. I mean, as we know, urgency is a tool of white supremacy, and nature teaches us to slow down. I'm gonna put in the chat, since June 5th, I've been taking care of my dad, and he passed away a few days ago. And as you know, paper folding, so now the paper folding begins for 100 days. But as you know, I've been folding objects that he's touched, these magazines. So every day, part of my practice is folding something, and I don't know what I'm folding. And we were looking through photos. So what I put in the chat is at the very end, you'll see a photo of him waving goodbye when he was a younger man. So, I mean, he wasn't dying then, but looking through photos, I found all these just like, I mean, photographs are not, remember this? Does anyone remember 1 hour photos? So, I'm excited to fold these things, and then to figure out how to musicalize them. And yeah, I think I heard someone else say practice. Also, I'm so resonating with Barnali also, as I'm the child of immigrants, but the migration trauma continues. So.
I'm gonna jump in and say, the thing that, just like what nature teach you, for me is, I feel like very free when I'm in nature, and I think I use it as a free platform that I can express in how I feel. And I've been, most of the walkings that I've been doing, it's been mostly actually in natural environment, and that's been something that kind of wanted to respond to what I see and get inspiration from. And and as Byron also mentioned, just to slow down. And I'm going to put actually 2-3 sentences that I wrote already in the chat, so we kind of see also. But yeah, that's just slow down and be happy from what you feel, and just use as a ritual, kind of be there and just contemplate. Yeah.
Katie, did you have any thoughts?
So, well, I've been thinking about a couple different things through all these different questions that have been asked. And what I keep coming back to is my relationship with nature is one where I've always tried okay, so nature, there's the stereotype that we might be familiar with. Many of you are youth, so you don't remember the TV commercial with the person throwing the trash out of the car and it spills at the foot of the Indian guy and he sheds a tear. So look it up. It's pretty classic. It may be late 70s, but like I've seen it. I saw it as a kid. They played it a lot. And there is this stereotype that like, you know, well, if you're Native American, you've got to be in tune with nature, right? And so as a child growing up in LA, I was like, I was a rebel and I was like, I'm not a hippie, I'm Native American. Like, so even though the hippies were taking on these tropes of Native American identity and like, so this whole thing got wrapped up as I was growing up, where it was something like I went to UC Santa Cruz, hello, you know, people were like, you're from LA, you don't recycle, do you? And like somebody told me that. And so I had this like constant, like, yes, I'm an urban Indian, but I do recycle. But there were these moments where I'm like trying to, all throughout my life, been trying to like embrace what I know is real. And then also like counter stereotypes. But what I'm really excited about is that the conversation is becoming more inclusive, and it is like allowing me to feel these things and these thoughts that I've always been like, well, I can't talk about that, I don't want to be a stereotype, you know. But now I'm like, well, no, there's information there, and there's a lot of pain and we are healing. But like what's really exciting to me is that people are like, oh, let's talk to Indigenous people. Like, let's have them be a part of this conversation in a way that's like beyond this like surface, like trash on the ground, tear in the eye. So I'm also like trying to be optimistic because it is an exceptionally difficult situation we're passing on to the future generations. And the only way I can refocus and like be optimistic and not be crying every night over the state of things is like, okay, language revival, cultural continuance, like what Linda's doing with the baskets, like it's making me cry because it's so important. And like people embracing it outside of our community is really important too. And finding parallels and finding like relationships is it's giving me optimism, and that's really important right now.
All right, that's about all the time we have for the Q&A section. But thank all of you for sharing. I really enjoyed being in conversation with all of you and hearing what all of you had to say. I'd like to kind of close out the Q&A session with a call to action, right? And this is for everybody. So I have a couple questions I'd like to pose for the audience and also for the panelists. The first one of them being, how can we maintain healthy and right relationships with all that we touch, right? And in addition to that, my second question is, how might challenging mainstream / colonial ways of thinking help us accomplish that? So I think one of the first steps we could do, and I'll share a resource here, is find out whose land we're on. So this is a resource that I highly recommend everybody check out. It is a map of Indigenous lands, and it'll help you kind of figure out maybe where to allocate your resources, maybe how to connect with the Indigenous people whose land you are residing on. And lastly, I would like to highly recommend this Instagram account. It's called Indigenous Women Hike. I highly recommend everybody follows them. They post very thought-provoking things, and they really challenge the white male-dominated way we talk about outdoors and nature and all of that stuff. But yeah, like I said, I am so grateful to have been in conversation with all of you, and I will go ahead and pass it to Glory so we can close out this section. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody. So this is it. Thank you so much to the artists for taking your time and sharing your insights and your art with all of us tonight. It's been such a pleasure. I've been taking mad notes too, which will help with all the tours and things that we're doing. So thank you, thank you. Thanks to all of the attendees and visitors who came this afternoon on a Friday. And thank you to Jacob and Mateo as well. That was an amazing Q&A. That was just so smooth and amazing. So thank you. It was so wonderful to hear from everybody. We hope to see you in the gallery soon. So have a really wonderful night. Bye-bye.